Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace starts right now.
Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. If he wanted to end the Russia investigation, this was a diabolical way to do it. The self-proclaimed law and order president has effectively brought the wheels of justice to a grinding halt with his self-created, self-perpetrated government shutdown. The FBI Agents Association announcing in a 72-page report that, quote, the shutdown has eliminated any ability to operate. That's according to one agent, and that, quote, the U.S. Attorney's Office is unable to issue grand jury subpoenas for financial institutions. That's according to another, the shutdown having real-world consequences. While the president, possibly living in a parallel universe, declares by fiat that he's delivering the State of the Union address next Tuesday in Congress, or perhaps at another venue. A senior administration official telling NBC News that White House speechwriters are hard at work on separate passages that could lend themselves to a speech at a different venue and for a different audience than members of Congress. But we start with that report from the FBI agents. Donald Trump has the entire federal government shut down over border security. But it turns out his shutdown may be the graver threat to our security. The report details the damage being done to the nation's premier law enforcement agency as the shutdown enters its second month. One agent writes, quote, I have been working a long-term MS-13 investigation for over 3 years. Since the shutdown, I've not had a Spanish speaker in the division. We have several Spanish-speaking informants. We are only able to communicate using a three-way call with a linguist in another division. Another agent writes, quote, not being able to pay confidential human sources risks losing them and the information they provide forever. It is not a switch we can turn on and off. And another, quote, on the child exploitation side, as an undercover employee, I've had to put pervs on standby. This just puts children in jeopardy. And finally, put simply, quote, the fear is our enemies know they can run freely. Joining us from the New York Times, Chief White House Correspondent Peter Baker, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence Frank Figliuzzi, Jeremy Bash, former Chief of Staff at the CIA and the Pentagon, and at the table, Elise Jordan, former the George W. Bush White House and State Department, now the co-host of the podcast Words Matter, and Eugene Robinson, columnist and associate editor for The Washington Post. I have to start with you, Frank Figliuzzi. I read this report with my eyes rolling back in my head and my stomach sinking. Take us through all of the work. I talked to a former senior law enforcement official who said, forget about drug cases. They're done. You can't prosecute them or investigate them without money. And on the counterintel side, I assume a lot of informants rely on the financial piece of that partnership.
You know, Nicole, I'll never forget, as a very young supervisor at headquarters, getting called up to the assistant director's office, and it was a very sensitive closed-door meeting about a case. I turn around to walk out, and I see a sign posted on the back of his office door, and I'll never forget it. It said, America is at peace because the FBI is at war. And that was the mentality then, and it's the mentality now. The American people need to understand the FBI goes to battle on our streets every single day. If you think this means nothing to you, understand that the gang that's preventing you from sending your kids to the local playground because it's too dangerous, the guy selling crack at the end of the street that makes you feel unsafe to go by, none of that's getting done on the FBI side. Sexual predators, crimes against children, kidnapping, and let's talk about the global impact in terms of counterterrorism. All of this being curtailed. It's the FBI's job to counter the greatest threats facing America. But now, what's possible is the greatest threat of all is coming from the Oval Office and our president. It's an insider threat. There's real impact to this. If you're not buying into this concept of, hey, no federal employee needs to treat their job as an entitlement. I don't care if people are putting food on their table. Let's go with that, put that aside, and let's look at the impact on you and your neighborhood and your town, village, and city, and understand that this is already being felt on the streets of your neighborhood.
Jeremy, I don't think we can underscore enough that the biggest section in this FBI report, and I suggest everybody take a look at it. I would love to know if the White House looked at it. I'd love to know if the president read this report and read these words directly from the FBI agents. I'd like to know if the law and order president understands just how badly he's weakened the nation's top cops. But I'd like you to explain how counter intel works in terms of this relationship that we have with informants. They're not necessarily good guys as depicted in movies. Sometimes they're making a tough choice, right, between helping the United States of America and perhaps working against the United States of America. That relationship depends on continuity. We need to be reliable partners, and we need to be able to pay for their services. Is that right?
That's right. And each and every day, the counterintelligence professionals at CIA and at the Department of Defense work hand in hand with their colleagues at the FBI, and they rely on the FBI. So when you pull out the capability of the FBI from the national security apparatus, you're not just hurting the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're not just hurting those specific cases. You're also hurting all of the activity that the CIA, the Defense Department, and other agencies rely upon from their colleagues in federal law enforcement. And just to put a fine point on it, if you are running a case in counterintelligence or counterespionage or even in the context of a drug case, and your responsibility is to show up, run a human source, or participate as an undercover asset and actually make a purchase, make a buy, funnel money to a potential target of an investigation, and you don't show up with that money because the federal government's shut down and there's no appropriation, you're suspect. And you're suspect, the fact that you're suspect means that in some ways the target of the investigation may realize that an undercover investigation is underway. What? You just forgot to pay the money the same day that the federal government shut down? It's too obvious. It's too overt. It's very bad tradecraft, and it's very endangering to our own assets.
And Frank Figliuzzi, this is something that all Americans can understand. The agents who contributed to this report came from field offices all over the country. They wrote about something as simple as not being able to pay for an informant's phone card. The idea that we would burn a source, burn a line of information on the counter intel side or the counter-terror side over a phone card that we can no longer pay for seems to be a stain on American credibility. Would you agree with that assessment, and would you put the blame squarely on the president?
So first, not only our allies are looking at this saying what gives with this, and I'm sure they're feeling for our intelligence community, but I'm even far more concerned about our adversaries looking at this. There are champagne corks being popped back in the Kremlin right now because they couldn't have engineered a better scenario than a demoralized FBI that can't pay its bills, can't pay informants. And yes, the leadership is responsible for this. The leader responsible for this is the guy who said he owns this, and he'll take it on the chin for the shutdown, and that's Donald Trump. So that's a reflection of the degree to which our president is putting self-interest over national interest. The thing that worries me the most, if I had to point to one thing in terms of impact, Nicole, linguists. Linguists who sit and translate sensitive wiretaps, eavesdropping in counterterrorism cases. What is not being listened to today? What is being put on the shelf today that have to be listened to after the government reopens? What are we missing in terms of a secret code or a plan being discussed to hit some city in the United States? That's my #1 concern.